Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 4, your final edition around mooting and training the nervous system to cope with and manage the high stress, the high stakes, things that come along with experiential learning opportunities that are meant to challenge us, and support learning and growth. In this fourth part, we're going to talk about bouncing back from difficulty, building resilience and strength. And I really thought long and hard about whether or not to start with this component, because there are a lot of elements of self-care built into this final portion of our 4 or 5 part mini-series. Self-care, preparing the nervous system to be strong is important information to know up front. But I wanted to walk you through all of the things that you might be experiencing, from understanding stress to managing difficult conversations, or accepting or learning to accept critical feedback, without judgment, self-judgment, and doom spiraling, before I got to how to teach you to use all of this knowledge and move forward stronger. My philosophy is that if we can get into the habit of supporting our nervous system with prevention strategies, we can avoid the need for intervention in high stress. And by intervention, I mean we either crash and burn because of our stress and we have to have someone come and help us pick up the pieces, or intervention that, we experience such high stress in the mooting environment or any experiential learning environment that we don't want to go back to it, or we never want to do it again. We want the experience not to be harmful. We want it to be helpful. And how we do that is we take care of ourselves way upstream of these actual experiences. So again, this bouncing back from difficulty and building resilience and strength component is going to be about 20 or 30 minutes with some self-care pieces and a little more understanding the brain, especially the mind, and how to support the mind to show up with a positive orientation, understanding all the components of ourselves that show up in stressful situations and using that to our advantage. I'll end this session with maybe some final summative pieces, a point for self-reflection, some things like that that you can choose optionally to engage in. And again, we should be here together for roughly 25 minutes, give or take, if I can stay on time. So let's start with building resilience and strength, and understanding that from a particular perspective. I like to use Tara Brach's framing around something that she refers to as RAIN, to support resilience. So let's define resilience, and then we'll move into Brach's explanation of how we can frame our understanding of situations to support strength. Resilient individuals have built up essentially a core set of competencies that give them mental toughness. So people who are resilient are mentally tough, have strength, and can perform optimally, or at least good enough, in situations where there might be stress. So if they're asked to show up as a leader or asked to support others, they can do that and use those experiences to build more strength for future experiences. Resilient people are less apt to give up when they experience setbacks because they've been there before, they've shown up for themselves before. And that goes to kind of the subtitle of this whole mini series, in that simulations train the nervous system. I am safe. I can do this. I've got this, right? Because I've been there before. I've done it. I've experienced stress, but I bounce back, I dust off, and I'm able to show up again. So even if you find that you've tried a lot of the strategies that I talk about in this 4 or 5 part mini series, and you're still experiencing a great deal of stress, that's okay. You are supposed to, in some cases, experience that stress and show up for yourself and work through it. And there could be bumps along the way, as long as you're not being turned completely inside out by the stress. So Tara Brach refers to a strategy called RAIN when we're thinking about dealing with difficulty, whether it's emotions or situations where we are likely to beat up on ourselves or become negative. RAIN is an acronym that's used in a lot of different arenas. Tara Brach likely got it from Buddhism. It comes from sort of an Eastern philosophy. You see it a lot in Eastern spirituality or philosophy. And what RAIN stands for is recognize what's going on, allow the experience to just be what it is, be okay with observing it, investigate the experience or the emotion with care and understanding, and nurture yourself with self-compassion. So an example of this would be, if you watched a few videos back, I talked about how I sometimes have panic, that my body can go into a state of terror. That's from that first video when we talked about states and traits. When there's no real threat, it's just I perceive something and panic ensues. Sometimes when we do public speaking, we can get lightheaded, fluttery heart, heavy chest, and that can cause panic. Sometimes on airplanes or in tight spaces, those kinds of things can cause panic. And RAIN helps me observe those emotions, be okay with them, sit with them, not subscribe to them, because panic tells me I'm going to die, right? Panic takes me straight to the worst case scenario. Catastrophizing, right? A couple of videos ago, we talked about thinking traps, stinking thinking. And my panic or my anxiety will send me there. So how I use RAIN to support myself when I feel that panic coming on, let's just say I'm about to make a big presentation. I'm pretty stressed out about it. I'm walking into a room and there's maybe 150 people. This is an environment that my body comes alive in, and it's in a good way. It's also in an anxious way. So one thing I'll do with myself is RAIN. So I will say to myself, okay, what's happening here? This is anxiety. I'm going to name it to tame it. All right, anxiety has shown up. How do I know? I'm going to investigate. I know because I feel heavy in my chest. I feel like I can't catch my breath. I'm starting to have racing thoughts. These are definitely signs of anxiety. So I'm investigating where it's resting in my brain, in my mind, in my body. I might be feeling jittery. I might be feeling like I'm going to pass out. I might be thinking, have I eaten today? All kinds of things come to mind. And I'm just going to investigate that. Did I eat today? Yes. Did I have an adequate amount of caffeine, but not too much? Yes. And when it comes to the nurturing part, that's where I'm going to apply self-compassion, where I remind myself that, you're okay. Anxiety is okay. Fear is okay. It doesn't make you bad at your job. It doesn't make you a fraud, because, anxiety likes to tell us that we're a fraud or that we're an imposter. A lot of us get that imposter syndrome. Those parts of ourselves, which I'll talk about later, they show up and they tell us all kinds of crazy things that aren't true. And I have to nurture that. I have to say, you know what, anxiety, thanks for showing up. Thanks for trying to show me care. Thanks for trying to stop me from doing this scary thing. Public speaking is hard to do. I do it for a living and I struggle with it. So I've got to nurture that part of myself that actually wants to do this work. And that's how I show up for myself. Now I'm kind of pretty much trained. I'll stop in a bathroom or at a mirror before I head into a room to speak to people. And I'll just walk through RAIN, like, what am I feeling? How is it showing up in my body? What can I do to support it? Part of my nurturing and investigating experience with RAIN is checking into things that I need. So do I have something to ground me during my presentation? I like to have, something to hold, typically a pen or my glasses. That helps to ground me. Do I have some notes in front of me that I can refer to? That will help me. My water bottle is always handy to have close by. And those things will help to make me feel comfortable and safe, aka nurtured. So I invite you to think about using RAIN as an acronym or a philosophy to help you investigate some of the feelings and emotions that come with the stress or anxiety that you might be feeling as you prepare for a big presentation. Now we're going to move on to, quickly running through some self-care components. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because there are no surprises here. We know as human beings what is going to help us to be well. I'm just going to remind you, and I'm going to frame them in terms of our neurophysiology. So, what is self-care? I've talked before in this mini series about how we are wired to protect ourselves and to connect with others when we can't protect ourselves. That is the fundamental basis of our human wiring: protect and connect. So self-care activities fall into these two categories, and they support us to either A, strengthen ourselves and support us to strengthen others, that's protect, or strengthen connections between ourselves and others. These are the things that help us to survive and thrive. So when I sense, going back to checking in, I taught you that way early on a few videos ago. When I check in with myself, if I'm below baseline, if my stress is high and my mood is low, I'm at that checkpoint where I'm saying, okay, I have to apply some self-care here, or I have to reach out to people who can help me to take care of myself. Be aware of that, and we'll launch into some self-care activities that you can do to support you depending on how you're feeling. So I invite you to make a T chart, sorry, on the paper, your paper in front of you, and divide it between protect and connect activities. And this will be your menu for self-care. When it comes to self-care, it's different strokes for different folks. We all subscribe to different things that help us to feel well. So when you see activities in the next few slides that you think would be things you could do or you would like to try to support self-care, write them down. If you see something that you're thinking, nope, I would never do that, I don't think that would ever help me, then let it go, right? When it comes to self-care, pick what you like, leave the rest. That's hugely important. And, when it comes to understanding these things, we also want to make sure that we don't use self-care strategies and then think they're going to be good for everyone, right? So if something works for me, I'm not going to assume it's going to help someone else. If someone else comes to me and they're struggling, I'm going to provide them with an array of ideas that might help their self-care. And they might choose something for self-care that's completely the opposite of what I might choose. So protect activities. These are activities that soothe and calm, aka protect the nervous system, the body. These activities trigger endorphins through positive emotion management. These activities are going to enhance serotonin, which helps to decrease and allow the release of cortisol. Serotonin is the happy hormone. Cortisol is the stress hormone. What we want to do with all self-care is decrease cortisol and release cortisol and increase serotonin, oxytocin, all of those, positive dopamine, all of those hormones that can help us to feel well, grounded, solid, armored up, ready to take on the world, right? So activities that support, protect, soothe, and calm. Again, no surprises, no shock here. Journaling, meditation, which can be walking, sitting, standing. There's various forms of meditating. Breath work. I like to take 3 deep breaths 3 times a day. I do it in the morning when I'm getting ready. I do it in the car on the way to work and in the car on the way home from work. And when it comes to breath work, if you inhale for a few seconds, hold for a couple seconds, and exhale for a few more seconds longer than you inhaled, you're going to get a full diaphragmatic breathing experience. And that's where we push the breath out from all the way deep in our body. Diaphragmatic breathing calms the nervous system. It sends signals to the brain that we are okay. Anytime you have a chance to stack a breathing activity into your day, do it. It is fundamental, and it's my #1 recommendation for self-care. It seems simple, but it's always the simple things that pack a punch. Quiet time, alone time, noticing time is good for this. If you do rain, which I talked about previously, that's noticing, that's helpful. Heat or cold. So you might be a hot bath person or a cold plunge person, either or can help to soothe and protect the nervous system. So can reflection. That's where, journaling or just sitting in self-reflection or walking and thinking about our purpose, our goals, our intent, that can be helpful. And shifts in perspective. Anywhere we can get perspective on something. I've talked a lot in these videos about stepping out of like the drama triangle or stepping out of the emotion or the situation to gain perspective, to think about our thinking. That will help us further understanding, empathy, and self-support. Very important shifts. Connect activities help us to manage and connect, and they trigger endorphins through positive forms of social bonding. So here we're going to get oxytocin enhancing that's going to lower and help to release cortisol. These activities include things like laughing, singing, dancing, having fun with friends or groups of people. It doesn't matter if we're doing this in a religious sense or a spiritual sense or just camaraderie and hanging out together. If we're running or we're hiking with groups of people, intimate partner activities, volunteering, touch. We can even provide touch to ourselves. We have touch points on our body that we can provide safety and comfort. And, there's some research that says we need 12 points of touch a day to boost oxytocin and happiness. So petting your pets, hugging your partner, giving some comfort to your own hands or parts of your body that you feel could use an extra hug. All of those things help us to increase oxytocin and release cortisol. Protect and connect activities help us to recharge and rest. So these are cortisol processing. Remember, I talked earlier about how stress comes in and we have to work to release it. So cortisol processing and release can happen through some of these activities. So sleep, every 20 or so minutes, we go through a sleep cycle where we have an REM processing cycle, rapid eye movement processing cycle of deep sleep. And each one of those processes an immense amount of stress. So they say for most of us adults, we need anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of sleep a night. If we're in the adolescence age group, so if we're in 12 to 24 years old, that's the period we know as adolescence, we need up to 9 or 10 hours of sleep a night to get the amount of processing we need to deal with the stress in our life, right? So we know we have a lot of stress going on, match that with sleep so that you can get into cycles and, have that dump of cortisol that your body needs. And this is the kind of sleep that comes from a natural circadian rhythm, right? It's not sleep induced by medication or alcohol. If we can get a natural sleep, that's the best. If we need a little bit of prescribed medication to help us to sleep, that's okay. But we don't want to be in the habit of using that as being the only means through which we can fall asleep. So we want to practice getting into some good sleep hygiene, staying off these devices late at night, allowing for yellow light and that circadian rhythm to kick in. Anything that helps you gain perspective, retreat, reflect, imagine, identify successes and spend time imagining your health and your wealth, practicing gratitude. I talked a lot about that a few sessions ago. Play, experience awe, wonder, joy, join a dodgeball team, go out and play with your friends, do activities where you have fun. That's going to help you do this. Any kind of sensory integration activity, earthing and grounding activities, and of course, nature to nurture, going out in the sun. So these are great things you can do to support your self-care. Now I'm going to move on to talking about self-compassion specifically. I brought it up in the RAIN strategy. So I want to talk about this and empathy, and then we'll end with some parts work and some reflective components. So self-compassion comes from the work of Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, and they have a lot of books and resources on self-compassion. The self-compassion workbook, which actually I do have it right here. I was going to say, I think it's in my office, but this self-compassion workbook, you can see it's full of tags and papers, is my favorite book for self-compassion. I highly recommend picking one of these up. You can order them on Amazon. If that interests you, reach out and I can help get your hot hands on one. But self-compassion has 3 components: self-kindness, mindfulness, and common humanity. Now, why these components? Self-kindness helps to remind us that we can make mistakes, we can fail, and we can still be okay. Perfection is not the goal, right? Helps us to keep perfectionism in check. I always say, if you set the bar at perfect, you go to bed a failure every night. So we want to lower that bar and be okay with mistakes and failure. We got to apply self-kindness to do that. The next component is mindfulness, and that's just present moment awareness. Staying in the now, not going on the runaway train of the future and not going back and regretting or feeling guilt or shame or blame for the past. So we talked about a lot of the emotions that lead to catastrophizing or labeling, and we want to get right in the here and now to avoid that spiral, right? What am I feeling right now? What can I do about it? How can I help myself? Common humanity is understanding that we are all in the same boat, right? We're all flawed. We all experience hardship and suffering as human beings. And if I can understand that, then I can empathize with your suffering. I know that I suffer, and I'm going to apply self-compassion to support myself when I do suffer. Therefore, I understand that you suffer as well, and you have periods of difficulty, and we can help each other to be strong. So these components in red here are the opposite of self-compassion. If we find ourselves in self-judgment, over-identifying with negative things, or over-identifying with our problems, like I talked about before, and isolating ourselves because of our fears and anxieties and worries, that's trouble, right? So be aware of that. Apply the self-compassion that matches up with the components in red and support yourself to get connected to yourself, to the present moment, and to others, and work towards wellness. So that's just a little piece on self-compassion. I'll just talk for a moment here about empathy. This is more or most important when it comes to working with others and understanding and being there for them. If you find yourself in an experience where someone needs you and you're not so sure how to show up for them, typically human beings kind of jump into fixer mode, and not everyone needs or wants to be fixed. I find that most people just want to be heard. And this is how you apply empathy and hear other people who need help from you. First thing is, empathy fuels a connection over a response. People don't always need you to respond or provide strategies to fix their problems. Take perspective in terms of observing and listening and processing how someone is feeling if they bring an issue to you. Stay out of judgment. This comes up a lot, right? And in order to do that, we have to be sensitive to our feelings, sensitive to others' feelings, recognize emotions and that they're a normal, natural part of processing, and then communicate, right? Speak to the cognitive part of the brain that is hopefully online if we've been applying these other strategies, and reach out to help, right? What can I do to help? Curious questions are best. What do you need? How can I help? Or even just questions that show, or reflections that show listening. I don't know what to say here, but I'm just so glad you told me. That's a great response to someone who's shared something heavy or big with you, and you're not quite sure how to deal with it. Now that we've talked about this, or now that I've heard this, is there anything I can do to make this better or to support you through this difficulty? This is just something that might come up in some of your mooting. I wasn't sure if it would or not, and I thought it doesn't hurt to kind of throw this in here and talk for a moment about empathy. So now I want to end this piece here by talking about the parts of us that show up when we are in stressful situations. Stress, distress, and trauma is going to bring out all of these parts of ourselves that can get us into trouble, but they're actually there to help us. So we're going to hope for the best, but we're going to plan for our parts. And so this is recognizing that up here, there's more than just Judy. There's more than just me. There are many parts to who I am, and they have different names, different labels, and they're all there for a reason. So really quickly, we are made up of different parts. There's like me, myself, and I, and probably someone else up in there. We have a true self, the true to me core self, in addition to the parts that show up in difficulty. Our parts battle for power and control, and that's because they're trying to take over and save us or rescue us from having to deal with something that's hard. And all parts aim to help us. So some fundamental pieces that we want to keep in mind as we explore some of the parts that show up that are there to strengthen the true self. They're there to help empower us and heal us, but it doesn't always feel like it. So what are the parts of self? I mentioned already we have a core true self, and I use the acronym supportive, evolving, loving, fierce. That's the real me. In addition to that component of who I am, I have the parts of me that are rescuers, managers, firefighters, and exiles, we call them in family systems therapy. So family systems, I'm just going to try to bring this all up here, is a type of therapy that helps us understand our parts. Comes from the work of Richard Schwartz, and it's a kind of misleading title for what it is, because family systems are not actually about our families. They're about the families or the systems in our own head. So Richard Schwartz likes to say that inside of our heads, there are families of people, and they're made up of all the personalities that we've come into contact with that have helped to shape us. And they just exist up there, and they're ready to go, like the barking dog, amygdala. When they're triggered, boom, they show up and they're there to help you. So family systems, therapeutic understanding of parts tells us that we have protect and connect managers, and we have protect and connect firefighters, and we have vulnerable exiles, parts of ourselves that went way back deep inside because the world was too scary or too hard, and they're just hiding in the background. So we're going to walk through what some of these parts are, and just think about how we might reflect on them in a way that's going to support our well-being. So what I would like you to do here is take a look at some of these labels, and I invite you to pause the slide if you want to read through some of them and just see if any of these descriptors are things you would use to describe yourself at any point in time. You can think about what points in time these parts of yourself show up. So where might I see perfectionism creeping into my world, people pleasing, caretaking, that victim role that I talked about a couple of parts, or a couple of parts ago, we talked about that. The empath, the skeptic, the striver. Where are these parts of myself showing up in my life? And are they helping me or hurting me is kind of the question I want to ask myself. If they're helping me, so perfectionism, for example, can sometimes help me to get the job done, do it right, put in that effort that I need to put in. But it can also be harmful, because if I take perfectionism too far, I might spend too much time working on something and not have enough time to attend to other things in my life. Same with a sense of overwhelm or jealousy, grief, certainly addictions or distractions or anxiety. These things are going to show up in my life to protect me from things. However, If they're causing me or other people harm, they're things I want to evaluate and spend some time with. So take a look, and as I said, just jot down some of these that are maybe familiar to you, and we're going to do some reflective work with them here in a moment. So this is the point here. We want to understand these parts that show up and do something to support them for ourselves. That is how I take accountability and responsibility for who I am today, right? Because I'm an adult in the world, and it is my responsibility to take care of myself so that I can take care of others. If I do these things for myself, I'm going to be able to avoid what I call the badlands. And those are feelings of burnout, apathy, disassociation, depersonalization, loneliness, anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, all of those things that we talked about in those states and traits way back in the introduction and the overview. So I'm going to avoid, slipping down the scale in terms of threat and alarm and fear if I can take care of these parts of myself that show up and get curious about them. That goes back to that RAIN philosophy as well, right? When we're going to investigate and nurture these parts of ourselves. So if I'm working maybe with the people-pleasing part of me that shows up to be helpful and to make sure that I'm liked, then I might want to ask, what role is this part playing in my life? How does it help to manage my life? What is it telling me I need? You see, some of these questions will be very familiar to some of the reflective work we looked at earlier. What relationship does this part of myself have with other people? What positive intent does it have for me? What's it trying to protect me from? Is it a good job? Is it a helpful job? Would the part of me that's a people pleaser prefer to do something else? Maybe it wants to be a more loving, caring part, and it just shows up as this people pleasing part that can't seem to say no. So I'm going to investigate that. I'm going to investigate where it rides in my body, how it makes me feel, and learn to understand it a little bit. And again, the more we understand, name, and tame the feelings, the thoughts, the sensations that we have going on inside of us, the more we're going to be able to nurture them, support calm, be compassionate, and decrease stress over time. If we fear stress, avoid stress, don't deal with the thoughts when they come and go in our head, then they're just going to keep self-perpetuating. And like I said in the overview, that which we resist persists. So we want to face and embrace and support these things, not pretend like they're not there and disrupting our life. All right, so I'm going to leave you with some principles of personal power. If you notice any behaviors from the last few sections of this mini series creeping up into your life and causing you trouble, and then I'm going to share with you some closing remarks. So principles of personal power, these are facts about human nature, and I leave them with you as food for thought, given all of the learning that we've done over the last 100 minutes or so that we've spent together in this 4 or 5 part series. The first one is all human beings are capable of growing and changing their behavior. You are the only one who can support or produce growth or change in your attitudes or behaviors within yourself. You have the power to produce any growth or change in behavior in yourself that you want. You cannot make anyone else grow or change their behavior. You can facilitate and support the growth or behavioral changes another chooses through your relationship with them. And what I like, about this information is that it reminds us of where in our life we need to be accountable and responsible for growth and change, to support well-being, to support ourselves to manage and cope with stress, communicate effectively and manage conflict, and support others by showing up for them. And it reminds us of where we don't have power. We don't have the power to make anybody change their behavior if they're showing up in a way that is not supportive of their well-being or our well-being. And the final reminder that we can facilitate their growth and change through our relationship with them. So we're not trying to make anybody else change when we have conflict or we're trying to communicate our needs. We are trying to support and foster change through relationship. And that's the key piece. It's that through relationship and connection, we can support managing and growing through difficulty and conflict, from the inside out and in relationship and connection with others. So I'm going to leave you here with a parting thought around mooting, because I know it is a competition-like environment. And I want you to remember that in these types of environments where we are negotiating, competing, where we're showing up and trying to give the best part of ourselves with respect to our knowledge and our skills and our attitudes, that comparison, not competition, is the thief of joy when it comes to any life experience. So we want to be able to have healthy competition, healthy conversation, healthy sharing of the things that we're learning and growing through, but stay out of comparison. Just know yourself, understand your instincts and your biases, our own bias towards negativity, and try to engage in perception checking to have a little bit of a filter between yourself and the negative bias. And just grow and learn to respond thoughtfully to life events versus reacting to them. So someone who is utilizing the power of responding wisely is knowing their needs. They're open, curious, transparent with themselves, and they take actions to move stress through their life and through the world, and they problem solve. All right, this is the final slide here. If you have a few moments, I'm just going to leave you with some perfect storms, because I want to share with you some things that can lead to disaster when it comes to all of the topics that we've talked about over the last couple of hours. And if you find yourself in any of these situations, you might be in a perfect storm. And I'll invite you to think about how you can problem solve ahead of time to make sure that you can potentially avoid these perfect storms or cope with and manage them if they turn up in your life. So the first one is having low meaning and purpose and high expectations. This goes back to what I said in the very first video. We are in a profession that hopefully we look forward to, we love, we've got a passion around. And if we go into this work knowing our meaning and our purpose, that it feels like a calling, that this is good work for us, then we can meet those expectations. That's easy to match up. But if we just have high expectations and we're not quite sure why we're there or doing what we're doing, that's a recipe for a perfect storm. So we want to see where we can align some of these things and increase meaning and purpose, decrease expectations so that life is manageable. The next perfect storm is low confidence matched up with high worry. So applying things like self-compassion, empathy for yourself, and practicing things like RAIN or spending time journaling and reflecting and doing lots of self-care activities can increase confidence. And the more confidence we have, the less worry we're going to have. We can also bring down worry by spending time with those anxious thoughts or those anxious parts of ourselves. And again, we're not working to completely eradicate some of these things on the high list, but we're looking to balance with increasing some of those things that might be low and maybe just bringing them into balance. So low self-care, high stress, recipe for disaster. As we know, we've talked a lot about that. Low self-esteem or self-worth, high perfectionism, perfect storm. Low connections with with others through stories and relationship, and a high focus on self. We want to be very careful here that, even though we're focusing on self-care and self-compassion and self-worth, we're not getting caught up in just focusing on ourselves and disregarding others, their needs, their story, and the attention that needs to be balanced in relationship and connection. Low identity. So this also is similar to meaning and purpose, but if we have a low sense of self and a high sense of comparison to others, we are going to end up on a roller coaster that, again, is a perfect storm. We've got to have a strong sense of self and try to stay out of comparison with others, so that we can continue to build strength and armor for difficulty. Low boundaries, high accessibility, perfect storm. That speaks for itself from our second or third video. Low distress tolerance and high anxiety. So I invite you to think about, what is your tolerance level for stress? How high does stress have to get before you reach a breaking point? When I do the temperature and stress level check-in with myself, I know that I can get as high as an 8 or a 9 for stress, as long as I'm taking care of my mood. So there's the anxiety piece. If I have low mood, high stress for longer than a few days at a time, I'm going to crash and burn. And I like to think my distress tolerance is still pretty high. So just think about that. How tolerant are you to stress? We can practice being tolerant to stress by engaging in stressful things and reminding the nervous system that we've got this. Again, the whole subtitle to this session, and show up for ourselves. If we've got low accountability and high responsibility, this is a perfect storm. So this is the kind of person that feels like they're responsible for all kinds of things, but they're not actually accountable or showing up to take care of much. And so just be careful that you're not low on the showing up portion, but high on the thinking that you're responsible for all kinds of things. Try to balance that out and be the kind of person that knows what you need to be accountable to and who's responsible to show up for those things. It's going to help to decrease your stress in the long run anyway. Low security, high sense of threat, perfect storm. Low risk, high avoidance, perfect storm. We want to engage in some risky behaviors like mooting or stressful experiential learning opportunities, even though we might get some criticism. We might get some constructive feedback. We might run into conflict with peers. Don't avoid these things. Again, they remind our nervous system that we can. Low coping and high addictive or maladaptive behaviors. Perfect storm. We want to not avoid and not default to addictive coping mechanisms. We want to stay within the lane of healthy, adaptive coping, and that is by applying self-care, self-compassion, boundaries, empathy, and support, all the things that we've talked about this evening. The last one is low worth and high judgment. This, the online world is a perfect place for this storm to blow up. Be very careful about how you talk to yourself, and try to notice all the things about you that are amazing, and stop, if you can, judgment when you feel it creeping in. That part of yourself that's judging, try to lay that to rest and let it know that you don't need it to show up right now. You're working on your own worth and building confidence and competence. And we don't judge those things. We know that we might make mistakes, and we know that mistakes are okay. After them, we're going to learn and grow and come back stronger. So I invite you to spend some time thinking about any of these areas you might be low in, that are balanced with an area, or matched up, with an area that you're high in, and think about what the possibility is there for a perfect storm in your life. And that just might be a pathway for you to start problem solving, getting ahead of stress. So that's all I have to offer you for our 5-part series around coping and managing with high stress situations, training the nervous system to be okay with difficult, risky, stressful experiences. If you have any questions about anything I've talked about over the last few sessions, reach out to me. You can find me in room 180 in the College of Law, or at judy.fernuk@usask.ca. I invite conversation and connection as you're going through the Mooting experience this fall and winter. And yeah, I hope that something I offered you over the last hour or so has provided you with an opportunity to explore some of your needs and work on connections and relationship with self and other. Take care, and we'll see you when we see you.